My story is, I'd say about 6 years ago, I started to have some really severe, and I guess I should warn people, this is a little graphic, menstrual symptoms. Severe, heavy bleeding. It got to the point where I couldn't go to work when my period started, and I might have to stay home 2, 3 days. I couldn't be away from the house. One time I tried to go to work, and in the half hour between the time I left home and got to work, everything that I had put down there I had bled through it all. I had a girlfriend who had dropped out of nursing school, and I used to always call her with things, and I called her and I told her what was going on and how heavily I was bleeding. And I was driving back home, and she said, "I don't mean to alarm you, but you shouldn't drive back home. You should drive to the emergency room. And I don't mean to alarm you again, but you're bleeding so rapidly. As safely as you can, I would hurry because I'm afraid you're going to pass out any second." So I drive myself to the hospital. They admit me immediately. So they started treating me for this, stripping me of clothes, slapping electrodes on me, all kind of fun stuff. No waiting room for me. They took me right back. I was in there for a couple days. I probably would have been in there longer, but my father was dying and I had to go home. It was still not so great, but it had gotten better and I thought I could manage it. I decided to move out of the United States. I moved to Havana. It's stressful when you're dealing with different cultures, language issues, things like that. My very first menstrual cycle in Havana, it started with an absolute bang. I can't even describe it to you. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to bleed to death in my apartment. A friend of a friend who was a gynecologist in Havana examined me, gave me ultrasounds and things like that, told me that I had huge fibroids. He offered to do my hysterectomy for free in Cuba. I didn't do it. I decided to come home, and the universe was just working for me because on my way home, I was flying from Havana to Mexico City, and I started hemorrhaging on the plane. I had never bled that much before, and I had bled a lot. I had never bled that much before. I had multiple blood clots, like the size of my fist, coming out. I got put in an ambulance and rushed to the hospital in rush hour in Mexico City. And the whole time I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And nobody knows where I am. My family knew I was coming back, but they didn't know I was in a hospital, admitted to the hospital. Stayed there for a day. They didn't really do, somehow the bleeding stopped. I got back on a plane, I came back. I went to the doctor. They wanted to do a hysterectomy. That's the only thing that they would do. Hysterectomy drugs, all these horrible drugs. I said no. I said, but I have to do something hardcore or I'm going to die. I had pre-ordered You Are the Placebo while I was in Havana. So right when it came out, I downloaded it to my tablet. And so when I got back and they were saying, well, we're going to give you a hysterectomy, and I told them no. And I didn't know what I was going to do at first. I didn't know whether I was going to try to heal myself with Whole Foods or whatever, but I knew that I wasn't going to let them cut on me and I wasn't going to take the awful drugs. So I decided that I was going to try Dr. Joe. I started doing the meditations. I flew back and fell out on the plane in May. I think maybe June, I started doing You Are the Placebo. And I downloaded the meditations. And I would do them every day. It struck me when he said he doesn't get up until he feels something. I was like, okay, this is my life. I did it hardcore. I was like, I'm not getting up. I would not get up. I mean, sometimes I would sit there and be sobbing because it was hour 3 and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel a shift or anything. And I wanted to get up, but I was like, no, I have to feel it or I'm going to die. I have to feel this. I have to do this. And I kept doing it. And one of my big things was I would visualize in great detail the conversations and everything. I would come into the doctor's office. I would look at his hands, I would look at his coat, I would look at the dust on the blinds, I'd look at that ugly picture in the room, all of that. And I pictured him opening my chart, my file, and looking confused and like saying like what the hell to himself, and then closing it and making sure it was my name and he had the right file, and then telling me that that I no longer had it, or something was gone, or telling me this what I was trying to do was heal myself, to confirming what I already thought. And and I would do that in great detail all the time. I would picture my reaction, like, oh my God, see, I told you, I'm done, all this other stuff. And we would have a conversation about spirituality. He wouldn't believe me, but I go on my merry way. That was my visualization all the time in great detail. And a version of that actually happened. I came here to Carefree for the Progressive in September. By the time September came around, and I started meditating with Dr. Joe in June, by the time September came around, I had shifted things dramatically. I wasn't afraid for my period to come anymore. I was telling people that I had cured myself. This was in September, but I hadn't actually had any doctor verify what I knew, which was that I was cured. Because the doctor was still trying to give me drugs and still trying to give me a hysterectomy and hormones and all this fun stuff, and I was like, no. So right after the Progressive, I told the doctor, I want a blood test because I was severely anemic because I was always bleeding so heavy. I want a blood test because I don't believe I'm anemic anymore. This is what I was telling the doctor. And I want another ultrasound, a scan of my uterus, because I think that things have changed. He was like, oh, okay, we'll do that. He didn't believe me, but I was very persistent. And so I did that. And he was saying, when the test came back, it showed that, because they said I had 2 very large ones, and they said that the inside of my uterus was just riddled with smaller ones. When I got the ultrasound back, the ones that were smaller were completely gone, and the larger ones had shrunk significantly. I thought he was going to be happy, but the doctor got mad because he assumed that either the person who did my current ultrasound was incompetent, or the one that I had right before I went to him was incompetent. And I said, no, that's not true. And he said, well, you didn't take the drugs and you didn't get an operation. There's no way for this to be true. And he said, there's no way that these 2 ultrasounds can be right. And I said, well, don't forget, I've gotten multiple ultrasounds out of this country and in this country, and they both show that I had large fibroids. And he said, but no, this can't be right because you didn't take the drugs and you didn't have an operation. And I said, well, actually, doctor, I think that they're both right. And he was like, well, how can that be possible? And I said, because I haven't talked to you about it, but I've been doing some things that don't involve the American Medical Association. And I believe that they're both right and that I've done this. Now, my period is so light and carefree, I just don't know. I don't know what to do. It's even better than before I had any issues, and I thought it was fabulous before I had any issues. It's light. I forget it's even happening. Before, if I laid down and felt my lower tummy, I could feel the fibroids. There's nothing there. They're gone. As far as I'm concerned, they never existed. And I regret not saying something earlier, because the one thing that gave me hope to even do Dr. Joe is I read in the back of one of his books for his testimonials, there was a woman who came to one of his workshops and he wanted her to lay down, and she had severe bleeding issues as well. And she was afraid that she was going to bleed all over the place. And I was like, oh my God, I know that feeling. She actually wore like adult diapers, it said. And that's the determining factor that said, this is what I'm going to do as an alternative to what the doctor is saying. So That's my story.